Welcome to Beyond Coding, a dive into the world of successful people in IT. From your sponsors, Zebia, creating digital leaders. Here's your host, Patrick Akil.
Right, Alex, welcome to the show.
Hi,
Nice
thanks
to
for
have
having
you
me.
here. Yeah, awesome. I looked a bit into your past and I saw that everything you did was always Microsoft related, ASP, .NET, etc., etc. How did that happen?
It kind of happened because I chose to have a certain focus. I'm interested in a lot of things, and I thought I'd go completely mad if I try to stay up to speed with everything that is out there.
Yeah,
I was very comfortable with the stuff that Microsoft was doing, and I also started training people a bit on the Office side of things, Access, the local database that you can develop yourself.
Yeah,
that's where I got into the development side of things and teaching people how to program and do software development, and things just grew from there because I was always looking at Microsoft and what they were doing.
yeah,
I tried to keep up with their pace and stay involved, contribute on the Microsoft ecosystem as well and the Microsoft community at large.
yeah.
That's kind of how that happened.
Awesome. So it was a very conscious decision. You said, okay, I'm going to focus on Microsoft related stuff from now on.
Yeah. It's
how early in your career was that?
That would be around, I would say 1995.
1995, yeah.
Yeah.
And how far along with regards to software development were you back then?
I was studying physics at the time at the Eindhoven University of Technology. They were doing a lot of things there, and I noticed that you were programming on the VAX machines, VMS operating system, and that's when Windows and Microsoft technology got good traction.
Yeah,
I found that doing that made me enabled me to do things that I wanted to do, and to introduce that into the scientific area, but also as a side job because I know I was a student.
Yeah.
I got asked to teach people at companies about software development, and started off with, like I said, a bit on the Office side, but very quickly went into C++ development.
Yeah.
Doing things there and being involved with a training company, which later on became one of my first employers.
Awesome.
I moved there in about 2001, just after the IT bubble burst. Worked there for 4 years and then moved into another training company that did both front-faced training classes and also doing coaching on the job with companies in the role of an architect or lead developer.
Awesome.
And that's where I got my hands on as well. That I worked for about a year at a startup company as well in 2000, which I saw go down the drain because of the hype that came to a stop there.
Yeah.
But I was already well into Microsoft development and teaching people about that as well.
Yeah. Awesome. You've always had a knack for, I guess, teaching, and you speak on a lot of conferences as well.
Yes, I like to share what I know because people teach me things and I want to give back. And it's kind of a pay it forward kind of thing. And I found out that I have a real joy in explaining things to people, trying to get my mental picture across and helping people take their next step. Sometimes from the ground up, other moments by taking the next steps and getting better insights or more new frameworks. That's what I liked, and I also did it. Besides professionally, I also did it in my spare time as a water polo trainer, for example.
Awesome.
So it's a different type of training, but it's still about getting something across and enabling team play. Which is also what I like to do on the dynamics of human interaction when I teach classes or have projects with customers. So it's a mixture of technology, but also about the people and a little bit about the processes that happen.
Awesome. I love hearing that. I think with regards to software, we don't share a lot. We don't share enough, basically, which is why I like this podcast. as a whole as well,
Exactly.
basically.
Yeah.
You mentioned dealing with startups earlier in your career. Is that the type of company you deal with currently as well, or has that evolved since then?
I think it has evolved. I've worked at a large enterprise, Achmea. That's the large holding where several insurance companies are part of, like Zilveren Kruis, Centraal Beheer, Interpolis. That's a large organization and a lot of moving parts, different parts of the organization having different types of technology.
Yeah.
I was involved with the Microsoft Competence Center, obviously. I picked the place where they did the Microsoft bits.
Yeah.
And then I started working for Xspirit, part of the Xebia group, and again with the focus on Microsoft technology. Our focus is several types of companies, and they might be startup or early along the road, but it's large enterprises as well, and also small business companies.
Awesome.
And it's all a matter of where we can do the stuff that makes a difference, that we like to engage with customers to take it to the next level.
Awesome. Yeah.
Small startups can become very big in a matter of 1 or 2 years if they become successful. And I think that part of our story is that kind of growth, we want to enable and facilitate that in terms of the supporting technologies that we help implement.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. What would you say is the main difference in helping startups versus helping companies that are a bit more established and have a bit more size to them?
Yeah, I think the startups are still figuring out how they want to do things. So they're more, let's say, more fluid in how they organize themselves and willing to change things from the way they are to something that would work better. Bigger companies obviously have a well-established base with how things work from an organizational perspective. Changing things there is more slow in evolving. And it takes more time. So it's you need to be more patient and have a long-lasting effort to change things for the long end.
Yeah. So when you come in, let's say a bigger organization, and you come in for a specific task and a specific project, do you already have sort of a plan of attack on how you approach things? Is it kind of a wait and see kind of approach, or is it more I'm going to grab things, shake them, and see what falls loose?
It can be all of these, but mostly I think you come with at a customer that has a project or a question or a problem, and you need to understand what they are struggling with or what they want to solve or what their goal is. Yeah. Once you have a good understanding of what it actually is, then you can start doing stuff. And I'm not the person that goes to wait and till they come to you. It's more like stepping into the organization, reaching out, talking to a lot of people, harvesting their concerns, their requirements, their plans, and taking it from there. And then be proactive in things instead of having this waiting, because then things might not happen. Usually, you're asked to make to make an impact, and that's disruptive for ongoing things.
Exactly,
and that's why people might not be willing to be proactive themselves, because they have a lot to take care of, and you're there as someone that wants to change things from the way they are.
Yeah. How often does it happen that a company comes to you with a problem? You come into the company, you do your research, and you see things that they don't, and you figure out it's a completely different problem than the initial one they came with you.
Yeah, it's usually the initial question that they had is a reason to step into the organization, find things out, and then the question behind the question is usually what you really are looking for, and to see where you can make them, where you can help them. Yeah. For example, we had a call from somebody that was calling us and saying, "Okay, I've got a problem. It's about integration. I need an enterprise service bus." Yeah. And that's
they already filled in that solution.
Exactly. They already had a solution to the problem that they couldn't describe. And they could mention parts of it, but getting really down to the bottom of it and the root cause of what is the issue there, I think is a way to better help a customer with really solving the problem, instead of just the pain at the surface.
Yeah.
You need to really dig down to take away the root cause. But sometimes you need to work that way, and you need to get some room for thinking and air to breathe. And once you establish that, then they're like, okay, whew, now we can relax a little bit and we can change things for the better in the long term. So these little fires that we need to extinguish don't happen as often.
Yeah.
But
I wanna dive deep into how you then find the problem first. But before that, why do you think companies come to you with a problem and also a solution? And usually it's maybe even the wrong problem and the wrong solution. Why do you think they already have that, but it's usually incorrect? Is it a lack of knowledge, a lack of expertise within their own company? Or why do you think that is?
It might be that companies experience a certain pain or problem, and that's like what is most visible.
Yeah.
And because they're right in the middle of it, it's that what they focus on.
Yeah.
I think it takes more of an objective outside view to do the analysis on what is happening here.
Yeah.
And also companies they're living in their own bubble. They know what they know with the people that they have on board and their knowledge. Bringing in outside knowledge and expertise suddenly gives new insights, new viewpoints, and enables you to take a different approach that you couldn't before.
Yeah.
And I think that's why they come to us, because we have seen a lot of companies and seen the problems many times. It helps us to faster and better pinpoint what is actually happening there.
Yeah. Then let's zoom in on how you actually do that. A company calls you and says, well, we have a problem and might even have a solution. You come in with a fresh set of eyes. What is the first thing you usually do?
First thing is that I try to get to know the people that are involved, the stakeholders, and familiarize myself with them and what their concerns are, their questions are.
Yeah.
So it's like scouting the area.
Yeah.
As quickly as possible, because you want to move on from there. But it's the force field of all the stakeholders, who's involved, and trying to get some form of a particular assignment from your customer. What do you want me to do? And how can we measure if we're being successful there?
Yeah.
So there's a clear distinction on what was the question, or what do we actually want you to do, and how can we see if what you're doing is giving the results that we're looking for.
Yeah.
That's usually how I get started, but it's free format every time you go into a company, because the situation can be totally different. Sometimes you're asked to do a sort of a rogue IT side thing because the established things don't allow for it, and then you're like on a special mission as a task force to break through certain boundaries and limitations that are there. Other times you're asked to augment an existing team and work from there and help them reach the next level.
Yeah.
Other times it's very specific, and we have a production problem and we're in a crisis situation. We've been searching for 2 weeks, couldn't find what the issue is. Step in for a couple of days and work from there.
Yeah.
And then you're the fireman extinguishing the fire at the point in time, and then you can take the time to improve things so they don't happen again.
Yeah.
And sometimes that goes drastic improvements in architecture or implementation, because it's a fundamental flaw in a design that will, for example, give a single point of failure.
Yeah.
That's the bottleneck. And we like to think that, for example, in the cloud scenario, if people move to the cloud with an existing solution and they start in the cloud, that those fundamental limitations or flaws in a design, everything scales well in the cloud, including those flaws and bottlenecks.
Yeah.
And they become obvious, and that's a different kind of thing that you might roll into when a customer calls you.
Yeah. I'm assuming, for the example, that you're kind of a task force and you need to operate kind of outside of the existing flow. I'm assuming you get a lot of pushback, I guess, from the existing culture and the existing teams usually. How do you handle that then mostly?
Most of the time I would tell the story that of what we're trying to do, and that what we are doing is the work for let's say a better work for everyone. it's about evangelism of what you're doing and explaining people what it is that we do.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you just explain, all right, this is what we've come to do. And when we achieve that, it'll be a better scenario for all of us, basically.
It's the first of a kind of many kinds to follow. And it's the coaching and the teaching of others of doing it in a similar way so they can improve their way as well. And it sometimes can be a form of a symbiosis where you're the leader of the pack, starting as a side project, but then gaining traction and getting adoption from the company. Like, that's they can be successful because of the reasons that are there. For example, a more agile approach or DevOps mindset.
Yeah.
And when they see success, that usually is very contagious or appealing to others. We want to do it the same way as well. And it works, because sometimes it's like, we tried that, but it didn't work for us.
Yeah.
Seeing how it should be done helps convince people as well. So it's for a matter of gathering traction and being leading by example.
Yeah, awesome. Success leads into more success in that case, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, awesome. I love that you said that when you come into a company, first you ask for what the expectations are, because then you can make sure to meet them, and also obviously ask how to measure them, which is awesome. I don't think people do that enough, even in a team scenario. Ask what are you expecting of me in this case. I think it's a more direct approach, but it's not something often people do actually, which is nice.
And I would add to that what also happens in that moment is that you can manage expectations.
Yeah,
it's I think you need to be clear of what you can achieve, and if expectations are too big or too ambitious, that you need to clearly upfront tell the person that has that expectations, okay, we might not meet those expectations, or we are not going to meet those because it's unrealistic, or it's maybe phase 2 or whatever. It's being clear about that is also that there are no false expectations. Just accepting them as, because this is what we expect, and then you would say, okay, I'll go fix them all, but you know that some expectations can't be met. I think at the sort of the negotiation at the front, you need to clearly state, this is what, given the time or the scope, this is what we can meet in your expectations, and these expectations we need to deal with them, change them or let go of them for now, put them on the back burner for later on. That gives, it's for the customer, it's clear what they can expect and what they can't expect, because the last part is sometimes forgotten in the conversation.
Exactly. I love hearing that. So I'm assuming a lot of the times what a customer expects is not actually what we can deliver. They usually expect the world, but you're either one person or just one team. What happens usually when you tell them, actually, we can't meet those expectations. We can do this though. How does that conversation usually go?
I would say different every time, but if you can explain why and discuss what it is that what are they really expecting, and how can you expect that in during time? Because there's the first part, and then what happens after that? Can we fix your problem now? Can we solve the root causes and improve things? And I think that most of the time, everything is possible. You can do everything. It's more a matter of time and cost. That is the big discussion. We've had customers that would say, okay, let's pick the example of the customer that called integration problems. I need an enterprise service bus. And we would say, okay, let's first look at what are your integration problems? What is your current landscape? What do you try to achieve? Because having a solution, the first, what is the overall goal that you're achieving? And it turned out that in initial conversations, this is in a matter of half an hour, that the customer said, okay, we've got a very diverse landscape and everything is changing all of the time. It takes forever to do something new, and we're way behind with all technology. We want to be prepared for the future and being more adaptive and flexible towards the future, because we've got all these business ideas of how we ship retail goods to stores, but we can't keep up with the technology that supports it. All right, okay, so your question is much bigger than we need to tie all of the current things together. We need to look well into the future. And then you go back, okay, we can't do that from the get-go. We need to first solve your current problems. What are they? And then they would say, okay, let's do, can't you visit us for half a day and then present us with a roadmap into the future and a big master plan?
Okay.
And we're like, okay, that will take more than just half a day.
Exactly.
So we need to really engage with all the stakeholders, all the people that know about the current situation. Those are people from the business. Those are the technicians, the IT people.
Yeah.
And we need to understand your situation. Otherwise, we can't really advise you on what steps to take. We can draw you a picture of an ideal world, but it's more the roadmap, the how do you get there and which steps do you take in what order? Yeah. That's kind of how do you manage expectations? That's explaining what it can look like as a process overall. Yeah,
so it's kind of a listen and answer accordingly kind of process. I love that you said that you don't just look at the problem that they present you, but you ask them about their long-term goals. What are you trying to achieve? Because we can also help with regards to that and deal with the problems along the way, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's always good to understand what the big puzzle looks like when you start working on one of the little pieces.
Exactly.
Because the context of how it should fit, there are so many options and possibilities of solving a problem at hand. Yeah. But it's like, I always like to think that you want to know in what direction of your compass is your final destination. And it doesn't have to be precise, but it needs to be, okay, it's north, northeast. That direction approximately is where we're going. Yeah. So whenever you solve something, you want to make sure that you're at least moving somewhat in that direction, preferably exactly, but if you can't, as much as possible, versus we're now heading south because we wanted to have a northbound direction, and that you sometimes under circumstances need to go a little bit, against the wind. You need to go back and forth to move in that direction. I think that's part of evangelizing and taking on the current situation, slowly changing it and going fast where you can, but going slowly where you need to. And sometimes it's slow down to speed up afterwards, but clearly and well aware of where you're heading.
Yeah, awesome. So when you have that point of where you want to go, and you obviously make sure that you go that way, how often do you reflect if that way is still the correct way? And if you're still doing all the things you should be to go towards that goal?
Mm-hmm. That happens, I think, in the meetings that you would have to keep all the stakeholders informed. Yeah. And usually at the bigger organizations, even at smaller, I realize it's mostly at management level, C-level people that have the overview, are not necessarily involved with the technology, but the things that we do for the people running the business. And it can be healthcare, it can be finance, it can be utilities, whatever. Yeah. But it's their problem you're solving. It's not a technology party.
Exactly.
It needs to have a purpose, and it needs to increase business value. Yeah. And with that in mind, you constantly are giving feedback on what you're doing. And in the large organizations where you're making big changes to the way things are, it's important to also inform the decision-making stakeholders, because they need to be well aware of what is happening. An example that I'm thinking of is one of the customers that we recently served is a company that had a very clear distinction between business and IT. Yeah. And they even had external vendors, is what they would call them, suppliers of IT. One of their own daughter companies was such a supplier. Okay. And they have this demand supply kind of understanding relationship with the IT vendor.
Okay.
Instead of what we would like to think of is you are partnering with the people that know IT, but you're making a collaboration effort and form teams that combine business and IT, because business needs IT and IT needs the business to have any purpose at all.
Exactly.
It's a symbiosis, and it needs to meld together. Well, if you're doing those kind of things, then all of a sudden you find yourself at board meetings explaining to all these C-level people what is architecture, why do we need architecture to have a clear understanding of where we're going, how do we mirror the way we depict our organization versus the IT structures, and vice versa.
Yeah, because it needs to grow towards each other.
Exactly, and they start mimicking each other. It's a Conway's law that says if you have an organization with certain communication patterns because of teams or organizational structures, you'll see that reflected in your architecture as well.
Yeah.
As an example, if you have an application that has a front end and a database, and you assign people grouped on competence because they know how to deal with database servers, you'll get a database team, you'll get a database layer, and you'll get an application layer, and they start in distinct teams. And you also find that there's the representation of that in your architecture.
Yeah.
Versus other approaches where you're saying, okay, we want to build a solution. It has an application part and it has storage. It could be a database, but we put that all together. So we are more focusing on the functional side of things instead of the logical cohesion that you can find because things are similar.
Yeah.
Or everything that is a database we are grouping together. It's competence based, and it's a good approach, but it does give a lot of dependencies on other competencies, and creating these multidisciplinary teams where you have several competences combined allows you to create autonomous teams that can really speed up to create business value, and they can start learning about their domain and the contextual stuff that is part of what they are trying to build, and give them focus. But then you need your organization to make that shift as well, that they're not thinking, okay, we have business and we have IT as a cost center, and we are giving them orders and they need to give these planning and budget meetings where they are saying what they want. No, it's the business that has are doing their own IT with IT, and they can decide where they want to spend the time and effort on which initiatives. Yeah. And they're much more in control and working together instead of creating requirements, waiting for approval from an architecture board and waiting for approval from the team that they are they have the time to do the things, and they want to they need to do the budget planning as well. This is what it's going to cost. This is when it's going to be finished. Versus what we like to encourage is now start doing this co-creation where you bundle forces, join together, and start working as a team. And that's a team that takes responsibility of what we want to build with the stakeholders, translating that into technical things, but working together every day with the business to show them what you're building and learning about the business side of things, the domain knowledge and all the complexities there, and trying to figure out what you really need to build, how you build it, and what you can leverage as a common off-the-shelf software, and what is distinguishing in building the parts that really matter. Yeah,
awesome. I'm guessing the larger the organizations, the more harsh those boundaries are between, let's say, business and IT on opposite sides of each other. If you want to restructure them and say, well, no, you need to grow towards each other, do you start with a small team, or do you make a big shift across the organization? Or how do you usually do that?
I like to take the path of gentleness and slowly changing things versus radical changes that impact everything all across the organization. Yeah, it's more like what we discussed earlier on. How do you approach it if you are if you need to convince the other organization and you're starting as a task force.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, we had a customer that wanted to do to make this shift, and they well, what we did was we started forming these DevOps teams. But we said, okay, we can't do that without business involved. So we need people, the domain experts. We want to have them involved in the team on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And it started from what they call a strategic program. But once that started gathering speed and more projects were launched from that program, it was different from what they did before. But it started this piggybacking of the rest of the organization that said, okay, we want to join that as well. So instead of keep doing what we're doing, we want to do projects the way you're doing.
Exactly.
So we're bringing them under the governance of the strategic program. And the strategic program, in essence, was a digital transformation that wasn't called as such, but it was in effect changing the organization to start doing more of agility, DevOps, and combining IT and business, and switching around from this organization that is focusing on expertise versus certain domains. For example, in the pharmaceutical, is it about the medication? Is it about healthcare and taking care of people? Those are different kinds of things. And once you start looking at it from that perspective, things start changing and transforming. And you get a high performance organization because everything becomes decoupled, autonomous, and they can move at different speed with different goals because they are focusing on what they want to do and achieve.
Yeah. How important is it for, let's say, a product team to understand their domain and the way they operate within it, instead of just being like, well, I need to build this and this is the solution, actually understanding what the problem is and the goal they're trying to achieve?
I think it's essential, and you can't do it without that domain knowledge. That's really what I believe. If you don't understand the complexity of the domain, because taking all the usual stuff that can be taken care of usually quite easily. Yeah. But if you boil it down and see what remains, it's this essential complexity. That you can't make it any simpler than that. And that is what you need to understand. Because if you're working in close conjunction with the business, you need to speak their language.
Exactly.
If you're making all these translations because, okay, you're saying insurance, but I'm calling it, and then you make up this technical term, there's this misunderstanding, and then things are not the same. Reflecting that in your implementation and your designs will help the business understand what you're doing. And they can sometimes even read, for example, the technical specifications or even the tests that are being written to translate specifications into testable things. Yeah. They can even read those test scripts or whatever because it's exactly in their language. Yeah. And this the domain or ubiquitous language that they often call it, I think is a requirement for the team to understand, to have this common this common knowledge where they know exactly what business wants, and sometimes it even happens that there's a nice symbiosis again, where asymmetrical, so to speak. The business knows about the business, but the technical people are sometimes really analytical in their approach, and they can really find these edge cases and see other possibilities because of their analytical perspective, and help the business understand their business better. Exactly. Formulating it better, get better terms, or finding these details that they haven't come up with before. Yeah. And that's where you're in a win-win situation. Exactly. Helping your customer improve and reach the next level. Yeah,
sounds like that's exactly where you want to be as a company. And also as the people that they bring in to help achieve that. So when you come into a company, from what you've told me, you know very well how to operate and how to get to that level to make them successful. Is that also when you think, okay, now they can operate on their own? Is that also when you exit out and go on to the new one? Or how does that usually go for you?
Well, I think that what helps us is one of our principles and values as a Xebia company is the sharing knowledge and the customer intimacy, which tells us, okay, we need to do this together with the company. And I introduced this aspect where I said, okay, it's from my teaching, right? How do you teach people? And sometimes it's I'll show you first, then we'll do it together. And then you'll do it, and I'll watch and give you some feedback. Yeah. So it's show together yourself. Yeah. And I like to do that all across the board. Yeah. In the case of, for example, architecture, if you're asked as in a role of architect, what I like to do is explain everyone what is architecture. I'll show you what it is, and I'll do things. I'll do it from the high level architecture all the way down to the technical solution architecture of what we're building. But everybody needs to understand, and then we'll do it together. Because once you've seen this a couple of times, and you've always been next to me, it's not that I'm doing it in separately. It's together with you. But I'll show you, and then I'll give let's take the metaphor of the keyboard. I'll give you the keyboard, and we'll do it together, and we'll create something. And then afterwards, I'll step back from the chair, and you'll be at the keyboard, and I'll be looking over your shoulder every now and again, and giving you some advice if I have it, or ask some questions to better understand. And then you're on your own, and then it's time to move on, because your impact is not in that place anymore. Sometimes I like to call it democratizing architecture, or what it is that you're doing there. But making everyone part of it, it's everybody understands. It's showing them the big puzzle, and even if they're working on a small piece of it, they know what their contribution to the bigger part is. And I think that's for purpose and understanding is very important, to have people do the right things, because they all want to do the right thing, but they need to know context, nuances, and overview is very important there as well. Yeah.
Let's say you're in an organization, and let's say we have that separation of business and IT. And let's say I work on the IT side. What would I be able to do to kind of bridge that gap as an employee there? Do you have any advice with regards to that?
If you want to take away the strict boundaries or separation, I would say start collaborating and co-creating. And that's involving the people that know about it. There could be, sometimes it's the business analysts, and not asking them to give you a Word document which has the specifications that the business told the business analyst, but making the business analyst a domain expert in your team. And by closing lines, forming a team that way, they become part of that, and they will start learning about the IT. You can start learning about the domain, and then you get this nice knowledge transfer that goes back and forth, and you see a new way of working. And then so a domain expert could become the product owner, for example, or start be a stakeholder at first for the implementation details and the functionality that's being implemented. But by being part of it, it becomes a team effort, and they feel part of it instead of sending out a Word document, waiting for a couple of months, seeing something, it's too late, it was too expensive, and you didn't build what I really wanted. And
plus all the time that it got to get back to that point of feedback.
It's all about closing the loop, and it happens with the people that you're working with, and it happens with the solution that you're building needs to go into production to get feedback, because there's bridging the gap is also about bridging the gap to the customer, which is the user of whatever you're building. It could be internally in the company that gave you the assignment, but it can also be end customers that visit some form of a website where they need to do something, and that's what you're building. Involving everyone gives you this feedback loop that is essential to know what you're doing and if you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Just cut out the middleman and talk to the people that actually have the problems to build the solution for those problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes complete sense. We were talking about architecture earlier. I know you're a solution architect. Why a solution architect and not, let's say, a software engineer? Is it because you love looking at the grand picture?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, to be honest, I would love to be a software engineer as well and develop the code. And I do it occasionally because I want to stay in touch with what is happening, how you can use technology, how you can transform the ideas that you have and the ideals and the goals, how you can translate that into working software. And you need to be well aware of how do you build that on a certain platform with frameworks and the tooling that you need.
Yeah.
That's the practical side of things. And you want to have this hands-on, your feet in the mud feel, because otherwise, I would say, as an architect, you slowly drift off, and in the end, you're only drawing boxes and arrows to create this architectural diagram, but you have no idea of what that would look like if you really start building it.
Yeah.
And is it complex or not? What are the implications? You can't really tell if you don't know what two boxes and an arrow in between really mean.
Exactly.
So I try to keep up with where things are. .NET, .NET Core, .NET 5 is happening now. .NET 6 is. Well, you need to be aware of what is going on there. What is Microsoft's idea of the new architectures, the new cloud infrastructure, and how you can build cloud native applications, for example.
Yeah.
And then if you can only do so much as a software engineer.
Exactly.
Because you need to build stuff, and it's okay. But if you want to have a larger influence on what is being built, you take the next level of overseeing things, and that's usually the architectural. Might be lead developer role, but I think in that role you become aware that it's hard to help everyone out, guiding everyone versus building stuff yourself. So I usually stay away from committing any code at all, because the team will depend on your work, and usually you're helping all across the board and doing all the stakeholder management as well, which doesn't put you in a good place to actually produce something other than common understanding, aligning things, bringing it into the right direction.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. At some point, you go from being a maker to a multiplier, right? If you help everyone and teach them to be better, you multiply your capabilities as an engineer yourself, I guess. How do you stay up to date, though, with the actual making of things?
Whenever I can, I try to be involved, albeit for just a short period, with hands-on work as a developer or software engineer or DevOps engineer.
Sure, yeah.
The other way, I pick topics that I think are important, and I set a goal that I want to present a talk at a community meetup or at a conference or whatever.
Yeah.
And that for me, that's the deadline that is there to familiarize myself with the topic, really dig down deep into it, and also find all the places in the project that we're doing, and gather what I see there. For example, if you talk about DevOps, it's about monitoring. So how do you instrument your application?
Yeah.
And the frameworks and how they work, that's one part of the story. But then it's the best practices and the things that really work and why you want them to use them in a certain way. That's what you get. So it's experience from overlooking many projects versus telling a story about it, which helps you everywhere.
Yeah,
that's how I try to stay up to date. And it's a very luxurious position. I feel like a gentle version of Gordon Ramsay, because a lot of times you go into all these kitchens just for a very short period of time, and you're allowed to taste and sample what they're doing in a certain kitchen. Yeah, and you see what works, what doesn't work, what they're struggling with, and why at some companies things do work. And so it's you can see it's an accelerator to harvest all this knowledge, which if you would do that in a single project,
Yeah.
would be
A single kitchen in that case.
in single kitchen, and you need to cook there for half a year or a year to
Yeah.
understand what works and doesn't work. But if you are allowed to go back and forth,
Yeah.
That's okay. I learn things and I teach again, because that's still how I see it. Even if I'm producing code, it's always about helping others do the same thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you have your different tools in your different projects and companies, and you take that all with you and you distribute that knowledge back into the fold.
Yeah, I like the way you described it as being a multiplier, because
Yeah.
you harvest and you give back again, and
Yeah.
it accelerates things dramatically.
Yeah, I guess so. Beautiful. Thank you for coming on, Alex. I had a lot of fun talking to you.
Well, thanks for having me, and
Yeah, no
I
problem.
enjoyed it just as much. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that was it.